read. We try to teach them math when they don't know math. We try to teach them science, social studies. We sometimes try to teach them the arts. But when students don't know how to manage their emotions, manage their conflicts, manage their own behavior, do we teach?
Punish.
Say it a little louder.
Punish.
We punish. Right now, so think about that. Schools, these sites for learning, teaching all this other stuff, but we don't actually teach students who actually, really, at any age, I'm going to be honest, I'm 38 years old, and I don't even know how to handle my emotions all the time. Right? And I'm a fully grown adult. I don't know how to handle the stresses in my life. Sometimes I shut down, and I just sit there, and I don't do the things I'm supposed to do. Right? And yet we put this high burden on even the 4-year-olds. Right? Here's the last thing I'm going to leave y'all with. Right? We suspend a lot of students across the U.S., in Louisiana and in Lafayette Parish. But not only, let me back up, right? So we suspend a lot of students. The goal of that is to change behavior, hopefully create better schooling environments, and essentially, well, pretty much those two things. But the fact of the matter is, suspending students just doesn't work. And I'm going to give you all some information here about why that is, right? Like, and it's really surprising to people. Most people probably know somewhere in the back of their head that if you suspend a student and you kick them out of school, right, those students are going to perform lower academically. They're missing time in the classroom. They have lower academic engagement. They have lower academic orientations. And academic orientations, what that means is just like, where do you see yourself in school in your trajectory, right? Do you see yourself as like, yes, I can do this, I want to go to school, I want to be here, I can do all these things? Or is your academic orientation of like, no, I'm checked out? But here's the kicker, right? Like, we know all of that. Little known fact, suspensions actually create more discipline issues. If a student is suspended one time, just once, they are more likely to repeat the behavior that got them suspended and more likely to be suspended in the future than students who are never suspended. Schools with higher rates of suspension actually lead to higher rates of interaction with the criminal justice system, arrest, and incarceration and adult crime rates. So not only do suspensions not work to change behavior, they don't work in academics, they don't work for much of anything at all. And so there are specifics to that study, but I'm going to leave it at that, right? Like, the fact that suspensions don't work is one of the big shocking sort of secrets in education. But what's even the bigger secret is it actually makes discipline problems worse. Right? Most people think it makes discipline problems better, but it actually makes discipline problems worse. And we have tons of nationwide data to back that up. So I'm going to pause there because I think my 15 minutes are up.
I got a question for you. Yeah. That's why I was raising my hand. I said, you might think I'm raising my hand and cut him off. So how do we teach a kid because when we just tell them don't run into the road, you know, that's the artificial consequence. And I know it's the only way to get the real consequences is to actually get hit, so we don't want that. So how do we get something to click, you know, where, you know, obviously we can't give them the real consequence without it actually happening. So
I think one of the hardest things for adults is to meet children where they are.
Okay.
Right? Meeting children where they are with how they view the world and give them parameters in decision making. So I was a third grade teacher, and what I told my students all the time, and I may have shared this with y'all, or I'm not sure, but I told my students all the time, I was like, this is where we need to be. I have a plan for us to get there, but if y'all come up with a different plan that works just as well and we can get there, then we can do that, right? So for the example of how do we get a kid to not run the road? Like, you can level with a kid and say, look, I want y'all to play with the ball. Here is the danger. How do you propose we go about, right? Like, retrieve and call,
Okay.
making them the problem
The
solvers.
response, like you have to talk to them like they have sense. Like,
I got you.
That's
You know,
Because they do.
they do. They know a lot more than we give them credit for. All
Like
the
they
time.
really, they really
And
do.
as long as you are
That's
level
all
with
just
them
gonna tell them
and
with
you
him.
get a very impactful response with them, and just let them know, like, they understand what hurt feels like.
He does.
Explain what hurt feels like.
He does.
Do you know what it, do you know what hurt feels like? Yes, I know what it feels like to be hurt.
Some
Remember when you
people-
cut your finger and how bad that felt? Well, imagine that on your whole body.
Mhm.
Like, and you just build on what they already know and just give them kind of like
A little
bigger-
more knowledge.
Yeah. And like I said, like a lot of people like to think that kids don't no, they
They really
understand
do.
way more than we give them credit for.
One more
The
question after
alternative-
that.
Another thing to do with that
You didn't
is,
break it. You just have to put it back.
people always say, phrase things in the affirmative, right? Like, not,
Yeah.
don't go into the street, but I need you to play in the yard. Right? Like, I need you over here, I need you to do this, not the, don't do X, don't do Y. Right? Because then it's off limits, and then it's really,
The more off limits it is, the more they work out.
Or if you're walking in the street, then the consequence is you could get hit if you run in the street. However, if I show you how to look both ways, because if I'm not there, you're still running the street.
Yep.
If I show you how to look both ways to make sure a car's not coming, you can go get your ball,
yeah.
but come back in the yard.
Right, because kids see adults do that. Kids see adults walking the street all the time, right? And of course, every young person from tiny human to teenager thinks they're more grown than they are, right? Like some of us as adults think we're more grown than we are. But right, and so I think it's part of that is that we oftentimes want to put up barriers instead of actually teaching children and youth and students how to be active participants in their own life, right? Because they're going to figure it out. They're going to get the stimulus and the positive reinforcement, whether it's from you or whether it's from somebody else that you don't want them getting it from. They're going to get that.
One more quick question. So, for the people that would say that don't understand what you're saying about the suspension, like that suspension is the answer, or they would be like, well, how? So, what's the alternative? Is it something like what you just said about the ball, more like the affirmative? I mean,
So-
people say like, go ahead.
Yeah, in education, so this is the thing that I have at the bottom of my paper that I was gonna give as like the
Closing statement.
sort of closing, but like it directly answers your question, right? Like, and it's written right here. It says, "Be wary of simple solutions to complex problems." Suspensions are often seen as a simple solution to a complex problem, right? Like the actual solution for how we create community in schools, how do we change student behavior, how do we get students more actively engaged and academically achieving, that's a much more complex answer, right? Like it involves economics, it involves nutrition, it involves programs, it involves school resources, it involves desegregation and segregation of schools in our communities. It involves a lot of different things. So there is a term that came from often criminal justice called restorative justice that a lot of schools are trying to implement. And I know people who have been to BOAT meetings probably are familiar with restorative justice. And it's all focused on how do you create a classroom community, get students connected. And it's mainly focused on preventing conflict from happening, but then there are certain steps to what happens once conflict happens in the classroom, right? It's a lot focused on helping students express themselves, manage emotions, learn how to sort of self-regulate their own behaviors, plus building in sort of a classroom community that supports and scaffolds and plans for what occurs when conflict happens in the classroom. Because conflict happens in life, right? I think every single one of us has been in experiences and instances where some people handle conflict really well, some people don't handle conflict really well, right? Like even as adults, I know I sometimes don't handle conflict really well, and sometimes I do. Depends on the situation. So I think Why I say suspensions are the simple solution to be wary of, very often implementing different practices in schools can take anywhere from like 2 to 4 years, right? It is not quick, it's not easy, it doesn't push that quote unquote problem out the door and make it somebody else's problem. It takes persistence, it takes a lot of training, it takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of commitment, it takes a lot of resources. And with schools already facing, right, this is why I say it's a complex problem. I teach 16 weeks on a lot of these and just scratch the surface. Schools already facing resource shortfalls, budget shortfalls, teacher scarcity. The amount that they're able to dedicate to actually a sustaining different program is often very, very challenging for educators, right? Like, we got a teacher in the room, it's challenging when you have all sorts of stuff. I'm fully aware of that, right? But it's oftentimes the responsibility of the leaders above school level to make the investment in that.